Good evening, boils and ghouls, and welcome to another episode of The Collector's Friday Night Fable Fright, with I, your host with the most, The Collector. And tonight's little ditty is from a book called Even More Tales for the Midnight Hour, written by J.B. Stat. Seriously, is this going to be the running gag now? Every time I say midnight hour, clock's gonna... You know, there's 4 of these books, they all have 13 stories in them. I don't think I can do this another 50 times. Okay. So, as I was saying, this book was written by J.B. Stamper and published in 1991 by Scholastic. And tonight's little fable of fright is called Voices. Shall we begin? It's scary when you think your best friend is going crazy. That's what I thought about Lara. She would tell me secrets that no one else knew, secrets that made chills run up and down my spine. Then I found out the truth about the voices, and now I'm worried. Lara kept the secret to herself for a long time. I knew something was really wrong with her. Her face had gotten a drawn, worried look that never went away, and I could hardly remember when I'd seen her smile last. Then, one morning in English class, I realized how sick Lara really was. She was sitting at the desk right across from me, staring out the window and looking like the world had come to an end. I tore off a piece of paper and wrote her a quick note. It said, "Why are you acting like somebody died?" Lara jumped when I nudged her and passed the note. She opened it and seemed to stare at it forever. Then she looked at me with the most frightened expression I'd ever seen on anyone's face. Just then, Mr. Dudley, our English teacher, asked me to recite the first stanza of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. We'll get to that one later. I stumbled on the first line of the poem, but finished the stanza without any trouble. It's one of my favorite poems. Mine too. But today, its eeriness unnerved me. When Mr. Dudley asked someone on the other side of the room to recite the next stanza, I looked over at Lara again. She had a note ready and slipped it to me when Mr. Dudley wasn't looking. I unfolded the paper and read the short sentence inside. There's going to be a bad accident. Right away, I looked up from the note to Lara's face. She was staring at me with her big brown eyes full of fear. I looked back down at the note and read the sentence again. Lara had written it like a statement of fact, not a guess or a question. I wondered what kind of strange game she was playing with me. I tore off another piece of my homework paper and wrote, "Are you crazy?" Then I folded it up and threw it onto Lara's desk. I didn't think Lara could look any worse than she already did, but I was wrong. As soon as she read my note, her face twisted up like she was being pinched with pain. She quickly tore off another scrap of paper and scribbled something on it. Then she passed me the note without meeting my eyes. As I opened it, I realized my hands were shaking. "You'll see," the note said. Lara avoided me in school all the rest of the day. I couldn't find her at her locker when classes were over, and I decided to walk home with someone else. That night, I thought about calling her, but something inside held me back. The next morning, I met Lara's eyes the minute I walked into English class. She was staring straight at the door, as though she were waiting for me. But after I walked into the room, she kept on staring at the same spot. I passed by Mr. Dudley's desk and noticed a substitute teacher standing there. The whole class was buzzing with talk. As soon as I slipped behind my desk, Meredith turned around in front of me. "Mr. Dudley and his wife were in a terrible car accident last night," she whispered. "His wife might even die, and Mr. Dudley won't be back for a long time." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Poor Mr. Dudley. He had been married for only a year, and now he might lose his wife. Suddenly I felt a shiver pass through my body, and I looked over at Lara. Her dark eyes were shining like hard jewels, and there was a weird little twisted smile on her face. "See, I'm not crazy," she whispered to me. I shrank back from her glittering stare. I couldn't believe that this was my best friend whom I'd known since kindergarten. She didn't even seem to feel sorry for Mr. Dudley. Then the truth hit me like a shockwave. Somehow Lara had known about the accident before it happened. She had written about it in her note yesterday. I felt so sick that I couldn't look at her all during the rest of the class. I ran from the room before she could get her books together. Then I hung around with a big group of girls for the rest of the day so I wouldn't have to talk to her. On the way home from school, Lara finally caught up with me. I heard her voice call out my name from down the street, and I wanted to start running. But instead, I slowed down and tried to stay calm. "Wait," Lara called again. "I need to talk to you." I stopped and waited for Lara to catch up. She was panting in a funny way, as though she were out of breath, when she came up to me. Her eyes looked wild and there was a glossy sheen of perspiration covering her face. "You're not going out tonight, are you?" she asked in a shaky voice. "No, of course not," I said. "I'm studying for my math test tonight, and after that I have to finish my social studies project." I hoped she wasn't going to ask to come over and study with me because I'd never be able to concentrate with her around. "Good," Lara said tensely. "Just be sure to stay at home tonight. There's going to be a terrible fire." I looked at her for a long minute and then blurted out something that I instantly regretted. "Who's starting the fire? You?" Lara's face twisted up again like something was torturing her inside. "They just told me there would be a big fire," she hissed. "I don't know who's starting it." All of a sudden I couldn't stand the way she was acting anymore. I reached over and grabbed her shoulders and shook her. "What are you talking about, Lara?" I asked, staring straight into her cold, shiny eyes. "Who tells you these horrible things?" Lara pulled away from me and ran off down the street, never turning around to look back. The rest of the way home I tried to decide what I was going to do. I could tell my parents about the thing she said, or I could talk with the school counselor, but what if they all thought Lara was crazy too? That night I stayed home, even though my little brother begged me to take him to the movies. By 11 o'clock, I had just finished my social studies project. I heard the television news blare out from the living room downstairs. I could hear the sounds of screaming and yelling. I rushed down the steps to see what had happened, my heart pounding with anxiety. When I saw the television, I knew my worst fears had come true. On the screen, the movie theater downtown was being consumed by the orange flames of a terrible fire. I started to feel sick inside. It had happened again. Somehow, Lara had known about the fire ahead of time. Finally, I couldn't stand the thoughts that were crowding my brain anymore. I ran to the telephone and dialed Lara's number. After 2 rings, her mother answered. She told me that Lara couldn't possibly come to the phone. She had been sick in bed all night with a fever, muttering strange things as though she were delirious. I hung up the phone and stared at the wall. If Lara had been home all night, she couldn't have started the fire, but I knew that she couldn't have just guessed it was going to happen. Not that, and the car accident too. Lara wasn't in school the next day. All the other kids were talking about the movie theater fire. Luckily, it had happened between shows, but the police hadn't found any clues as to who had started it. I went through my classes in a daze, torn between wanting to keep Lara's secret and wanting to blurt it out to anyone who would listen. Finally, the last bell of the day rang, and while I walked home, I decided to tell my parents about Lara. But as soon as I walked through the front door, I saw my mother waiting in the hallway with a worried look on her face. "Lara's in the hospital," she said softly. "She's very sick, and she's been asking for you." I felt a chill run through me as I dropped my books on the hallway table and followed my mother out to the car. I wanted to do everything I could to help Lara, but now I was really afraid. We drove to the hospital in silence. Mum tried to start conversations, but my mind was occupied with thoughts of Lara. What if she told me another one of her secrets? What would I do about it? As I walked into Lara's hospital room, my heart started to pound at the sight of her on the bed. Her face had been drained of color, but her eyes were shining like bright little stones with a glint of red in the very middle. When Lara saw me, she beckoned to me to come closer. I walked up to the side of the bed and leaned over her, but Lara reached up and pulled my head down even closer to hers. "They say I'm going to die," she whispered in my ear. "The doctors?" I asked in a trembling voice, afraid to meet her eyes. "No. The voices," Lara said. "The voices say I'm going to die. Very soon." I was shaking now. I wanted to run out of the room, but Lara had been my best friend, and I knew she needed me. "There aren't any voices, Lara," I said, trying to calm her. "And you're going to get better." I pulled my head away to look at her. The little twisted smile gave her pale face a scary expression. "I'm not crazy," she whispered. "They talk to me all the time, the voices do." Suddenly, she grabbed the back of my neck and pulled my head down next to hers. Then she hissed in my ear, "Listen!" I screamed and pulled my head away. Then I stared down at Lara as she slumped against the pillow with her eyes shut and a smile of contentment on her face. The voices told me that I should stay and say goodbye to Lara, because it would be the last time I would ever see her. But I thought if I started running, I could get away from them. I was wrong. The voices have been talking to me for 2 months now, and I'm worried. Everything they've told me has come true, and lately they've been talking about an accident. They're trying to make me guess who the victim will be. But I think I already know. So there you go, kiddies. Now, again, considering I like to think of myself as the Mr. Rogers of the underworld, it is my immoral duty to leave you with this little piece of life and unlife advice. We all have voices in our heads. And yes, they all tell us to do bad things or to think bad things to ourselves or to others. My advice? Don't listen. There's always someone that you can talk to out there if you ever have these voices telling you what to do. Got it? Good. Thanks for joining my little Friday Night Fable Fright. And until next time, stay tuned. And good night out there, whatever you are.